Hello, can you hear me? Okay, great. So first of all, I don't think that we're going to have a very large crowd in here, so if you feel comfortable coming up to the front where we can see you and you can participate, that would be wonderful. Let me briefly just introduce myself and the session. So I'm Neha Kumar, SIGCHI president, and looking at how we think about co-designing SIGCHI Futures, and I'll break that down in a bit. So there's a few different conversations that we're having here. We have Carla operating the Slido, and we have Ignacio here somewhere talking about conferences soon. We also have ACM President Yannis Ioannidis talking about ACM updates. And we will also be hearing from Michelle about the Presidential Task Force on Responsible AI Use. And really, this is meant to be kind of an unconference format discussion. So please feel free, feel uninhibited to share your thoughts about SIGCHI Futures, SIGCHI conferences, and research practices and where they're going. So that's kind of the broad umbrella within which we're sort of having this discussion, and I'll just narrow it down to a few more concrete details. So we have, 3 years ago, we did the SIGCHI Futures Summit in Milan. This was in February of 2024, where we pulled together people who were conference leaders from different parts of SIGCHI to come and have discussion about our knowledge production practices. And the goal of that was to think about, well, we are in this post-COVID world where we're sort of transitioning through, and let's see where we want to go, and identify the key priorities for our conference knowledge futures. And we talked about publishing practices, we talked about peer review, we talked about volunteering and early careers. And those are the priorities that have been kind of top of mind for us since. And with regards to conferences, there's a few different formats that we'd like to dig deeper into. And those will also obviously create opportunities for more volunteers to get involved. And these were introduced very briefly at the town hall, but we will go a little bit deeper into that. So we'll start with that discussion or presentation, and then we'll go into talking about kind of ACM level updates and the responsible AI use conversation, and really invite inputs from you all as to how we think about the conversations that we want to be having at the Future Summit, which will be held November 16th to 18th. So with that, I want to invite Ignacio to just make this a little bit more concrete with the discussions of the different conference formats, and then we'll go into a deeper discussion.
So as Neha was saying, we're going to hold the next Future Summit in Paris, 16 to 18 of November 26. It's going to be, we're going to have a 200 people auditorium and 2 rooms for 75 people and 1 room for 30 people. And I think Neha's goal this year was to have some changes from last year. So instead of the SIGCHI EC proposing every session and everything that's going to happen, we want to hear from the community what are the points that they want to discuss in terms of conferences, in terms of the different, for example, the changes that have been happening to peer review. That could be some of the aspects that we can discuss, or the changes that have been happening to the different programs in the conferences, or the way that the conferences operate differently across our SIG. So these are things that we're looking for. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. So what we were going to do this time is do like a call for proposals where we wanted to know what you all would like to be talking about. So this is also a place for your input. Certainly, we want to focus on topics like volunteering and peer review, but if you have specific proposals in mind that you want to submit with others, that's something that's in the open call that we've put out that we'd like to get input on. Any input right now before we go on to our next presentation? Any questions, any thoughts that you have on what you'd like the summit to be focusing on? It's really hard in this large room to have this conversation, but
yeah, Neha, the other thing that we're quite interesting about understanding is the way conference surplus works. So right now they stay at the SIG, and then we have programs such as the Development Fund or the Gary Marston Travel Award, where conferences can tap back on their surpluses, and we're rethinking that model. So I think that's one of the discussions that should happen. And we're gonna bring data on 2 days, so the numbers for 24 and 25 on what is this current surplus of conferences and how much conferences have dig into that surplus. And the other thing is to understand how to create a system where conferences can have control over their travel awards. Yeah, I think those two topics are important for the summit.
and this is also input that we saw in the town hall, right? That we should be supporting our conferences more, and that's, I guess, why we're here. We'd like to know what we can be doing to support our conferences some more. So, if you're in the steering committee of one of our conferences, any thoughts that you have would be very welcome. And if not, then I think we can move on. Thank you, Ignacio, for sharing these. And over to you, Yannis. Thank you. And you have the microphone, yes.
You said that I will say some things about ACM updates.
I mean, you're ACM president, so
Can say whatever I want.
whatever you say will be an ACM update.
Okay, so what I'll discuss is about one of the three main topics that Neha mentioned, that is about conferences, and it's related to the previous discussion on reviewing and so on. I have been mentioning these things, maybe with some of these slides, maybe with other slides, in various events. And I remember even in my first CAI in Hamburg, in one of the topics I have mentioned the direction we should be going. We haven't been going in this direction wholesale, but you can see the need more and also glimpses of it. So I want to start by saying, why do we publish? Well, scholarly communication scientists, because that's also studying how we communicate scholarship, have been saying that we publish for 4 reasons. One, for registration. This is, Yannis did this, okay? Second, to validate. Hey, 3 people or 4 people, peers, reviewed and validate this thing. Third, distribution. Hey, world, see, this is good stuff. And fourth, archiving. 100 years from now, others, scientists of the time, to be able to go and find it. These are the 4 reasons why we publish as a scientific community. All communities, not just CAI, not just computing. And I won't go into the details, but currently, when it was printed publishing, one organization had to do all 4. Currently, the way things are going, number 1, registration and archiving can be done as one step by one organization, and validation distribution can be done by another one, now that is electronic publishing. Since we're talking about conferences, I'll go and say, okay, why do we have conference publications? And let me emphasize, again, we, computing, we are the only discipline that has this concoction, okay? A conference publication. In any case, why do we do it? Unlike all other sciences, we have three reasons why we go to conferences to publish. One is publication, and for that we have the four reasons that I mentioned before. Two is to give a presentation, and you heard in the town hall, well, we may reduce, we have 14-way parallel, 122-way parallel, how do we do it, short presentations, blah, 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 blah. So we come to present, and the third is to interact in the corridors, in panels, at the banquet, and if there's a banquet, and so on. But let's see these three elements. Okay, we take a plane and we go half the way around the world. Sometimes we are lucky, like myself, it was only 3-hour flight, for others it was 24, to have a publication. Why in the world do we need to come here in order to say we published something? Why can't we have, and the world to know about it? Why can we not, we come to do that. Currently, that's what we do it. To present, again, we go half the way around the world, have a paper to present, and for the world that is here to hear us, and we're talking about a canned presentation like the one I'm having now, right? Blah, 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 slide, blah, 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 slide, and so on. Of course, we could have published it somewhere. We could have had a YouTube presentation for the canned publication. And then the interaction, going around the world, having a paper, talk about a paper, talk about work in general with others. And from the interaction, usually good ideas come in. So this is, if you want, one big picture that captures everything that I said and the way I think we should all go to, especially as conferences become larger, as the community becomes larger because of China, because of the importance of computing or of AI and so on and so forth. Research work plus papers life paths. Currently, many papers are just going to archive. So let it go. Someone has an idea, let them write a blog, send it to archive or some other repository like archive. I'm using that as an example. And then people the world will see it there. People say, oh, I published on archive. No, my friend, you did not publish on archive. Publish means peer review. Publish means that the validation part is there. That's essential to publication. This is just exposition. You expose your work. It's like a blog post. And now, of course, with all the papers we're writing, you sneeze, you write a paper. You sneeze again, you write another paper. Expose it to archive. We don't care. But if you want to be evaluated based on this, your career or the research advancement, okay, if you want the validation part to truly have a publication, go to ACM or some other organizations, but of course ACM is the best, and go through the process of validation, publication review, then publish to a journal. Let us, our science grow up like all other sciences and have the publications to a journal. The world will know that's a publication. We should only publish to journals. And we should publish the good stuff, not the sneezing, okay? Then, of course, you can publish not just papers. You can publish data sets, presentations, protocols, a whole bunch of other things that are publishable, exposable, and possibly publishable, especially for presentations, which are important for someone to follow some depth. If you want to have, if you can imagine, we can also have validation of the presentation, that this guy wrote this paper, but then nobody can understand what they're saying, not because of the language, but because of, not everyone can give good presentations. So we can have some review, review of presentations, but that's optional. And then you put it on the ACM channel or wherever else, and then you have the presentation independent, the canned presentation, independent of the publication. And then it's time to go on a plane or a train and so on. And that can be by invitation. The invitation can be pull or push. I won't go into the details, but it can be because of a paper you published in a journal, a presentation that someone saw, possibly something you exposed on archive, possibly because you're so good and famous and people love you, they invite you. Whole bunch of other reasons. You come there and then you interact about your work with others and new ideas come in. And the interaction can be in many ways, can still be posters, can be flash talks, panels, workshops, let's come together and have ideas and so on, but not canned presentations. Of course, if you invite, I don't know, Jeff Hinton, they may have, or you invite anyone, okay, you invite Matt. He can give a canned presentation, but it's by invitation, not associated with a publication. It's a trigger for interaction. That's where our conferences, our scholarly communication should go to, separating publication from the canned presentation and from the interaction. Let's make all our conferences more and more interactive. It will be much fewer parallel sessions, to a large extent, fewer parallel sessions, and much more fun. How we do this interaction, there are many ways, okay? This will also partly solve all the sustainability issues about all this traveling and too many sites and so on and so forth. You can have 6 guys around the world, okay, where people go there to interact and not have the need to go there in order to publish. A bunch of ideas. There are places where, including in CHI, I mean, CHI people did some of the first unconferences. I hate the term, but I like the concept. And many other such experimental sessions I've seen in CHI, SIGGRAPH, a bunch of other corners of ACM, but also other communities are looking at it. Let's move forward, because our current system, I was listening to Regan earlier about the whole scheme of reviewing and so on. I liked many aspects, but it still, the next year it won't scale. It will have trouble. Let's think of scholarly communication and evaluation of researchers in a slightly different way. And I think CHI, as one of the pioneers experimenting with many things, can be an amazing ground to ferment some of these ideas at a larger scale than is happening currently around ECM. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yannis. That was great. I was really hoping that you would touch on all of these processes of knowledge production. So I think that leads us nicely into our next presentation. So Michelle, can I ask you to please? So I think this is the elephant in the room. We have to be talking about this now, soon, hopefully, and how we're going to be addressing AI use responsibly in many different aspects of our work, whether it is research, it is connected to the DL, it is generally within ACM. There's many questions that face us. So I'm going to now just hand it off to Michelle to continue.
Thank you. So I'm Michel Baudouin-Lafont. I'm from University of Paris-Saclay in France, but I'm also here as the chair of the ACM Europe Technology Policy Committee. And if you don't know what ACM activities in technology policy are, I encourage you to not ask ChatGPT, but go to acm.org and click the public policy tab there in the website, and you'll see what we do. Now, what does this have to do with the use of AI? On January 1st, ACM transitions to ACM Open, as I think you all remember or are aware of. And so a number of changes went into the DL at the same time. One of them, which I won't discuss, is the basic versus premium model. But another one was this one. If you went to a page of a paper, the first thing you saw was an AI summary of that paper. It did not have this text here in front. In fact, it was very misleading, if I may say so, because the first word there is abstract. And I went to one of my papers and it says, this is not my abstract. So I can see the room here, but
a show of hands, how many people think it's a good thing when you go to a paper on the ACM DL, the first thing you see is this AI-generated summary? Who thinks it's a good idea? Okay, I don't see many hands there. Okay, so there were some reactions, especially from us on the various technology policy committees, because we've been involved for years into reacting to, for example, in Europe, the AI Act and the AI Code of Practice, where the European Union was requesting comments from anybody really about these new regulations. To be perfectly honest, the ACM leadership heard our complaints, and now when you go to the ACMDL, you first see the real abstract, if I may say so. And in fact, I think now the AI summary is even behind the paywall, right? Now, the other thing that I discovered today is that if you go to a paper from this conference, it has this blue thing here that says, this article is summarized in an AI podcast. Woo, fancy. Now, I don't know what happens there, because I click there, you get to this page that says session, summaries, podcast. I couldn't see the podcast. And so, I don't know, I'm suspecting maybe there is an AI agent roaming the digital library and putting stuff there that we don't know about. I don't know. Wayne Graves will tell us. The point is, why did we react to this? Because the use of AI, of course, is the elephant in the room, as we've seen. And ACM has also embraced those issues early on. In fact, in 2022, we had the ACM Statement on Principles for Responsible Algorithmic Systems. That's when we were trying not to use the word AI. And also, ACM has a code of ethics. And a number of us on technology policy committees thought that maybe this use of AI by ACM without warning or advertising it, without asking for authorization from authors, was maybe not consistent with those principles. And so Yannis, ACM president, reacted to the feedback that ACM got from a lot of ACM members and created this presidential task force on responsible use of AI within ACM. So it started a couple months ago. We've had many meetings already. It has people representing different ACM boards and committees, the SIG board with Neha, people from the technology policy, from the ed board, etc. And so we created a first document at the town hall. Yannis showed a slide with a bit more detail about it. I don't want to go into details here. What I want to say is that the one thing is, of course, we want to implement all the principles that we know are good about responsible AI, but in concrete terms, in terms of concrete guidelines on how to implement them. And two aspects of this is not the only two, is conduct a cost-benefit analysis. Don't do it just because we can, but the cost can be the cost to maybe an author reputation if they find that the AI-generated summary is not really representing their paper. The cost can be environmental. How much did it cost to generate thousands and thousands of these summaries for all the papers in the DL? There may be other costs, and we have looked at those, but also the benefits, of course, that it can bring to various parties going to the DL. And one aspect of this is the consent models. If something is done, ACM is a community. What do we think about asking the different, again, parties, the authors, to opt in or opt out? We'd like opt-in to be maybe the default, but there are cases where it's not practical. And so what we want is to provide the ACM Council with guidelines and recommendations on how to use AI within ACM, and that's in all aspects of ACM, you know, from hiring people at headquarters to running conferences and to running publications. And of course, what we'll recommend as well is that we are a small group of people and we don't have all the answers, and so also how to involve the ACM members in this process. So now I would like to ask a few questions that are based on conversations I've had with people and have had a range of answers. So for example, you use your preferred chatbot and you're a bit short about ideas for your research maybe, or maybe you have an idea you want to discuss it with a chatbot, and the chatbot comes up with an idea that you know you wouldn't have had yourself. And I'm sure it's happened. In fact, people have told me it's happened. Now, first question, are you comfortable using this idea in your work? Show of hands. Yes? Don't be shy, come on. I can't see you anyway. Okay, so a few people are comfortable with this idea. Now, do you think this use of AI should be acknowledged in your paper, if you submit a paper? Okay, fewer hands. Now, if you think it should be acknowledged, I mean, what does it mean? It's like, oh, yes, I asked a chatbot and it gave me an idea, or should the prompts be provided in the supplemental material? Yeah, some people say yes, yeah, but there are even fewer hands. Okay. Other example, again, not born out of my brain, but practical. One of your co-authors, sorry for the typo, was in charge of the lit review. Usually that's going to be the PhD student, right? And somehow an hallucinated reference cropped up in the bibliography. Now, I think we all agree that's not a good thing. But my question is, how bad is it? Should we just like slap on the hand, the reviewer catches it, says, well, remove that, and get going? Should it be desk reject? Okay, a few hands. Should it be you're banned from publishing with ACM for the next 3 years? Okay, still a few hands. Now, this issue of hallucinated references, I'm sure you know, is not a sort of a isolated incident. I mean, there's an article in Nature about this. The NeurIPS study found a number of papers that were accepted and that are published with hallucinated citations. So it's not a small problem. Now, of course, I could continue asking questions about well, in HCI, we conduct a number of studies with human participants, right? And frankly, it's hard. Now we can have synthetic participants. We can have synthetic personas. What about this? It would be okay to submit a paper where you run the study, but with simulated humans? Okay. Some people say yes. I'm not going to throw hands for everything because we don't have the time, but what about using generative AI to do those time-consuming thematic analysis, you know? Yes. God, no. Thank you, Carla. What about... Yes, no? Yes. Yes, okay, see. What about using vibe coding for a prototype? Yes. Yes. Now, the thing is, for all of these things, if you think yes, do you also think yes, but report it? Yes. Yes, okay. And now what about the review process? We've had at least 2 sessions on the review process. So, of course, we know that people use AI to do reviews, but they know they shouldn't. Although the arguments I've used mostly is, oh, because if you put in ChatGPT, you know, it's you're breaching the privacy of the contribution more than the moral thing of I didn't really read the paper or write the review myself. But what about summarizing reviews for the ACs? We saw before, you know, that we're going to need thousands and thousands of ACs. Well, why not use chatbots instead? And while we're at it, why not make accept-reject decisions? We heard yesterday that, well, the review process is completely random anyway, so, you know, why not save that work? Now, of course, I'm pushing things hopefully a bit far here, but all of these things are happening in one form or another, in one conference or another around the world as we speak. So I think what I wanted to show here is that we don't have all the answers. We don't have in our small group, we don't have in this bigger group, we don't have in the whole SIGCHI or the whole ACM, and of course, as we've seen, we don't all agree. So what do? Do we decide that, okay, here's the guidelines, here are the red lines not to cross? Well, I think we can do something before then, which is to maybe we can agree at least on transparency. We can agree that if you use AI for something, you should say it. Now, in fact, we should already do this because the ACM policy on authorship says exactly this. The use of Gen AI tools or technologies to create content is permitted but must be fully disclosed. For example, the authors could include the following statement. ChatGPT was utilized to generate sections of this work, including text, tables, graphs, code, data, citations, etc. Now, I don't call that transparency, because if it's any of these things, which of those it is, and how was it done? How much AI was used? How much human oversight was there? Now, there is an FAQ, which is linked there, it's a bit hard to find, that has more details, but it's not a policy. It's just recommendations. And so I looked a little bit into that, and it turns out there's this paper in this journal, Accountability in Research, sounds relevant, about a taxonomy called, I don't know how you pronounce this, guided, Generative AI Delegation Taxonomy. A taxonomy for humans to delegate tasks to generative artificial intelligence in scientific research and publishing. And it comes with a GitHub website where they have an entire questionnaire to declare your use of AI. And in section 3, out of, I don't know, 6 or 7, there is the list of delegated tasks, conceptualization, lit review, methodology, etc. And for each of them, I only opened one of them here, you have specific items: idea generation, defining the research objective, hypothesis testing. Here's the QR code if you want to go there directly. Now, would it be insane to ask authors of papers in our conferences to fill out this form? Maybe a variation of it? Is it too much to ask to reveal what tools you've used to do your research? When I publish a paper that has just one stat in the paper, I write somewhere which software I use. When we run an experiment, we write which laptop and computer was used with which OS, etc. So why are we so secretive about our use of AIs? And so to finish on maybe something a bit more SIGCHI relevant is what is morally acceptable, what is responsible. As you may know, the EU AI Act has a list it's risk-based. And so under the high risk, which is not the highest level is things you cannot use AI for, like social scoring. The level just below includes education, not all of education, but some significant part of education, including grading for exams and admissions. And it's listed as a high-risk use of AI. And what it means to be high-risk is that you need to provide some level of accountability, auditability, revealing how the AI was used, etc. And so maybe if this doesn't happen at the ACM level soon enough, we could, in our community, start to agree and implement transparency requirements, not judging what is good or bad, but at least collecting data, what it is that people do. And based on that, what do we think is acceptable or not? But then, as you saw in this conference, I don't know if it's half, 40, 70% or 80% of papers are about using AI for some kind of new design. I think we also could conduct a conversation about what are the human-centered principles that drive our research to integrate AI in interactive systems? Not just how we use it to do our research, but what we do as SIGCHI, the systems that we create, how should they embody some human values? Someone very dear to my heart who's in the room likes to say, it's not the algorithm stupid, it's the interaction. Usually she doesn't say stupid. That person is Wendy Mackay. I'm sure everybody has guessed who knows her. And I think that's important because, and what I tell my student is, you cannot be good with AI if we are not good without it. Because then you learn to use it in responsible ways. You don't ask it to do your data analysis, but you ask it to critique your data analysis or whatnot. And so I would like to leave it at that. I think SIGCHI has a role to play in informing the rest of ACM on the best ways to do AI in ACM and in the research and all the activities of ACM. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really a wonderful, motivating slide, actually. I'm asking Carla now to put up the Slido so that you can also add in any questions or comments. And we'll move on now to other parts of responsible AI use. And if you recall, maybe some of you recall that we had a conversation about responsible AI use in the DL at the SIGCHI Town Hall in January. And this is soon after we made the switch to open access. And we had Julie Williamson leading that town hall. We also had Wayne Graves from the Digital Library Board. And I wanted to just invite them to kind of respond maybe to some of the questions and prompts that had come up then to sort of give you an update, but also how that work is moving forward. So I'm happy for you to go up. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And in the meantime, the Slido is up, so please feel free to use that to add any comments or questions.
No, so yeah, so thank you so much, Neha, for giving us an opportunity to give a bit of an update from the town hall in January. So I'm Julie Williamson. I'm a longtime SIGCHI member and volunteer, but also one of my other hats, I volunteer for the ACM Digital Library Board. And so what we had talked about a little bit in the town hall in January, we had talked about kind of some of the work that had led up to the decisions that got made and part of that, the launch in January. But also we've been responding since then. So definitely the feedback is being heard, we're listening, and I think we managed to do a lot of really rapid responses, which was a really big improvement, and Wayne can maybe talk about some of those.
Yeah, happy to do that, sure. Hi, I'm Wayne Graves. I'm ACM's director of the Digital Library. I'm not an agent that runs around placing things randomly in the digital library, although I think I'm getting that reputation. I think, we're in interesting times. I'm happy that we're in interesting times. I hope we all are. I think experimentation is going to be really critical. I think one of the things, I'll go into some of the details, one of the things we learned first, and I think Kai is a great example, our community is not shy about giving us feedback. Good and bad, right? Good and bad. I'm happy to say both happen. I think, we launched at the end of 25 with this, structurally different digital library that everybody's well aware of. And we were soliciting feedback. And there were some really key lessons, I think, that we learned about transparency. I think that's a good one, for sure. We reacted to some direct comments, particularly from the authoring community around not just AI, but around where some of the lines were around our basic and premium models. And it was days of turnaround as opposed to weeks of turnaround, which is a typical cycle for some of these the things for us to push out. So we really learned how to react quickly, I think. One of the things that came through loud and clear was just how much the community cares, depends on, and notices the changes that happen in the digital library. We put it up on the one day in December, and I think we timed it at 3 minutes before we got a comment that came in and said, what happened, or, and a few of those immediate ones were very positive, I'm happy to say, and some were not. And then when we started experimenting with AI, it was the result of lots of conversations that happened. Julie was in quite a few of those that came through the Digital Library Board, particularly around librarians that have to service their community. And they were welcoming a lot of these features. We did quite a bit of testing. I think we heard from a few authors. It really was a small number relative to the amount of activity that went on. Questions were asked about opting out, and this was when it was still a little gray about policy and direction for us, which is some of what sparked that presidential task force. But it was really interesting what we have seen in the comments from authors, particularly on summaries, just to point at that. Authors have asked about opting out, a few, and we've given answers back that said, we want you to help us make it better as opposed to just turning it off. And without exception, all of the authors that provided that feedback, were very welcoming to that and provided really good insight into how to better prompt the summary process. And it produced really good results that the authors themselves were pleased with. So I think, some of the lessons we want to learn is that, the experimentation will help move this forward. I think ACM's in a really good position and shouldn't necessarily be, afraid or shy away from experimentation. I think as long as it's clear that it's experimentation. Putting the AI summary up before the abstract was a mistake.
Which was fixed very quickly.
It was fixed instantly, yeah, very quickly. I will say, it was intended to be sure everybody noticed the summaries. Well, you noticed the summaries, I will say, as a result of that. So, but I think our reactions fast was what helped us, right?
Yeah, and I can kind of comment on kind of where we've gone since January as well. So, myself as an expert in interviewing and focus group research, that was the kind of role I was playing on the digital library board. So we had reached out with a lot of librarians and kind of end users, readers of the digital library through interviews, focus groups that happened online and in person. And so that's kind of what had helped drive some of these decisions. But after getting that feedback in January, one of the things we realized is that while authors were implicitly part of some of these groups, we didn't have an explicit working group focusing on authors as a stakeholder. And so that has now spun up. There's a new working group of the digital library focusing on authors and how they use the digital library, which features are being underutilized or overutilized or are missing. And so that's going to start with a few activities that are kind of coming out over the next couple of months. In particular, again, doing surveys, doing focus group and interview research with authors to focus on kind of author needs in the digital library. And so, yeah, that's basically, there's time to interact, there's time to give feedback. I'm the contact point for the Author Experience Working Group, so I very much welcome people who want to give feedback, want to give their opinions and ideas, because we have, as I hope we've shown, the flexibility to change and respond. Software is definitely not immutable, it changes, and so we should expect change from our software and not assume that things that are there are permanent or they're always going to be like that.
Yeah, we should think about this transition where we moved into this new model, particularly in this basic and premium structure, as a transition. I think there are both sides of that equation are evolving to find the best fit. The reception about the articles being available was really great. I think we realized that the expectation in open access went well beyond the articles. It was originally, thought of as, hey, articles are available, so, anything else about the digital library was separate from that. But people feel strongly, authors in particular, feel very strongly about some of the metrics that sometimes we question the value of, and we run some, statistics to help us understand whether or not people are using particular features or if they value them. Well, we heard loud and clear that there are some aspects. Metrics were put behind a premium model when we first launched at the middle of December, and we heard how important that was to groups of authors, that these metrics are visible, and it made sense, and we moved them quickly. And we got really good feedback from most of those same authors with all the concerns. They felt very positively that they can influence this community resource. It is governed and driven by the community. I think it's easy to forget that. ACM is not a software development house making a shrink-wrapped product. It's being driven by the Digital Library Board and groups of volunteers to help set its direction. And I think we have a lot of cool things coming up. Michelle might not love them all, but others might. I think that experimentation is key. And yeah, we look forward to all the feedback that comes in.
Yeah, we don't all have to agree. I liked that as a comment, but I think we should all try to understand each other's perspectives, at least as a starting point, which is where interviews and focus groups come in.
You want to answer any questions? Should we answer any questions?
Let's see if we have questions. But thank you so much for sharing that and giving the background. Do we have questions, Carla?
We have some questions. I'm trying to order them in my head. But for example, one question is about how It's saying in IEEE, we see formats that include interactive content in papers. For example, an interactive visualization. Is that something we might see in the future?
I guess this is for me and Wayne. Yes, and yes, and in the future and in the present. And Wayne, that's the direction, but Wayne, please.
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interestingly enough, just today, Kai Play folks came sort of running up at the end of the town hall to talk about how excited, to gauge whether there was excitement about, hey, we want to put some game artifacts into the deal. So yeah, part of this change in the infrastructure and some of the formatting that some of you authors feel is kind of painful, getting the data into a good, reusable, structured format enables us to do all these reusable artifacts and stuff. So we absolutely are moving in that direction.
Thank you. There are two questions that I'm going to read together, and perhaps they are more directed to Michelle. One question says, we should not introduce requirements that are impossible to enforce. There will likely be no way to confirm if or how AI was actually used. And another comment says, being open of AI use assumes that negative consequences for use are socially defined, but they are not yet. So how to design review policies for trust?
Good questions. Well, so I took the examples of the hallucinated citations because those can be, they're a smoking gun, right? And I agree with another comment from Elizabeth saying we should not call them hallucinations. Hallucinations are a feature of LLMs. They're not a bug. And it's true also that the systems that are meant to detect AI-generated content don't work reliably. I tried 4 of them recently well, actually on a letter from a student who wanted an internship. And 2 of them said it's 0% AI, and 2 of them said it's 100% AI. But I think the point is not to catch people. The point is to make them responsible, and by asking them to check boxes saying, I used AI for this, I did not use AI for that. Of course, some will cheat, but at least you have to check the box. And I think that currently we don't have to check any boxes. And I think that makes a difference. Now, for the negative impact of AI, or the positive one, yes, things are shifting, and people may have different measures of what is good or what is bad. I hear that now, a good AI engineer is measured by how many billion tokens he can use every week. Is that a measure we think is good or is bad? But let's start with having the information, the data, and ask people to tell us what they're doing, because if they're doing it, I think a lot of them think it's right. And if they're doing it knowing it's wrong, then I think it's another problem. So I don't have a better answer than that at the moment, but I think enforcing or encouraging more transparency is a first step.
Thank you so much. Should we go on to the TAPS question?
Oh, yes. There are also a couple of questions about the publication pipeline. And I'm going to look at Wayne. One question says, can we open source TAPS so people can improve it and also run it locally? And another comment says, can Kai or ACM fix the publication pipeline to be easier for authors? The writing templates and platforms, such as Overleaf or Word, are close to unusable and impair writing. So at least part of that.
Yeah, I'm happy to try to answer part of that. Yeah, sure. I think there's no magic to this TAPS system. This is, as I think everybody can agree, it's been around a long time, and it was attempting to evolve. It's not an ACM-owned system. It was attempting to evolve at a time when the requirements were changing. not the best recipe for any software project. I think we've reached a point now where the requirements are very well defined. They're no longer very, in most cases, they're no longer very ACM specific. They are very publishing standard requirements. We've been working at that for a while. XML based, it follows bits and JATS formats. You know, there's a whole bunch of these. Now that these things are extremely well defined, I think we absolutely will start experimenting with and moving in the direction of, as long as you can produce the required, from your perspective, output, so it's input for me, we're good. There's no magical reason why it needs to go through any specific system. It can just have a set of requirements, and I'm not so, I'm thinking we wouldn't necessarily take the code and make it open source from TAPS, but we would open up the data and requirements spec, and we could accept anything as long as it parses at the end of the day, we're okay.
Yeah, let me add to that one. Yeah, no, I mean, for my sins, I've been involved with TAPS for a very long time as well.
Longer than me.
And I mean, I think it's important to recognize we are completely, I mean, I'm very aware of how much work we ask authors to do. And that's not, you know, for nothing. I mean, one of the things that's really important, which I think is transparent, or it's not visible, so people don't realize what the work is for. But I think it's really important. What TAPS is doing is basically archiving our work in a marked down format that is then going to exist in 100 years from now, 200 years from now. So we're archiving the negative, not the photo. So we're not archiving PDFs. And I think that's a really important thing, that it's because it's invisible, we don't always realize what that work is for. And so having the documents in a format that are machine readable, that are going to exist outside, you know, of our lives is actually, I think that's really important. It doesn't have to be TAPS though. We have had a few authors that would like to submit in JATS bits, and you're very welcome to do that. But yeah, I think community solutions too, now that DTD could be made openly available, we could look at things, alternatives to TAPS. And that's one of the projects that's ongoing with the DL. Do you want to talk about a little bit that? Which is also another use of AI, which will be interesting.
Yeah, I don't want to go into too much of those details, but we are experimenting with various paths to get the content in. Some that's significantly lower lifts for authors, because especially when it's at the volume that Kai is producing, it just changes the game. And it is a significantly higher publishing content level than most of the other conferences, so just something to keep in mind. But yeah, I don't think, the only thing I will say, one thing you did say, we're also archiving those PDFs in case anybody gets nervous about that. You hate PDFs, but the rest, you know, yeah, but everybody else still sort of depends on them. So.
Thank you so much, Wayne and Julie. Do we have other questions, Carla? Otherwise, we'll hand it over to Matt.
Maybe one last question.
Okay.
There's a question saying that today in the ACMDL, it says to use advanced search, you must have premium access. Is this not covered in the cost of open access? No. The use of the search function.
Yeah, search is now behind the paywall.
Did you want to say something else?
ACM Open, all the institutions or individuals, all the institutions who are part of ACM Open get access immediately to the premium digital library. So all services, including search, are open to all of them. And otherwise, some form of search is open for the basic version and some premium. The details of the difference, I think Wayne can articulate better. But some search is completely open no matter what.
Yeah, the question was explicitly about advanced search, and
I see.
Advanced search is not open right now in the basic version. And I think a lot of these lines are under discussion with the Digital Library Board as a first line, and a lot of that will be based on community feedback. It is not really a decision feature by feature. Is this feature paid for? Is this feature paid for? Is this feature paid for? That kind of thing. It's much more of a package that makes it a premium offering that, quite frankly, the primary customer base are these libraries, the institutions, and there's a category I don't want to necessarily go into too much detail, I guess, but there is a category of institution that has traditionally subscribed to the ACM Digital Library while there was a paywall up that does not publish. And it's a very big set of institutions. And we are looking to keep those institutions in a supporting role with ACM, but they don't publish. So they don't have any reason for an ACM open deal because it only covers publishing authors. They want to stay around, they want to support the organization. They're not in a position to just sort of contribute to the organization. So part of this premium offering is a service that these institutions value and get to see it as something they then provide to the community within their institution. So it's the package of services. So, you know, as more services get rolled in to the premium edition, which is the plan going forward, I think there'll be always a look at moving things off of premium and back into basic and constantly adjusting that line, I think.
If you may say one sentence to complement this, because you went exactly in the right direction. Currently, besides the premium paywall, which nevertheless doesn't exist for anyone who is subscribing to ACM Open, by the way, so more than 3,000 institutions, as I said. Behind the premium wall are some of the services that used to be free on top of the closed content, and a whole bunch of new services. Whether they are the right services, people like them, people don't like them, that's a separate thing. But the goal, for sure, is that as new services are introduced to the digital library, eventually all of the older services that used to be for free to become free, and the value of the premium digital library to be exclusively on the new services. Open does not mean free, there is a cost. ACM has really, with a tremendous effort of the ACM staff, has the lowest cost of APCs and so on, compared to sister societies, let alone private publishers. But it has to make it, and it is subsidizing, it's putting some of its assets in order to make openness happen. But there is some cost associated that somehow needs to be balanced. And the goal is, as I said, to eventually all the old services, including advanced search, to be open. But that's a process. The sooner, the better, and we're working towards that diligently.
And just a quick thing to highlight to add to that, if you are interested in hearing a bit more about the motivations for what ended up in premium, what ended up in basic, and why that all kind of got designed, there is the post on the SIGCHI Medium that was published in about January in response to all of this. And I'm also very happy to field questions about that or point you in the right direction if you want to think more about, you know, why do we have this, this new business model.
Thank you so much, Julie and Wayne. And now moving back, actually you have your own microphone. So we talked about research, we talked about the DL, we talked about AI. We also want to touch a little bit on conference formats that we've been thinking about. And if you have any feedback, if you could offer that on the Slido, and then we'll close with that. We're closing a little bit early because there's an awards, SIGCHI Award celebration today that will be starting at 6 p.m. So we want to give awardees here a little bit of time before that. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Neha, and thank you everyone sitting there very patiently. I just wanted to perhaps draw some strands together and reflect on what we've heard in the questions, but also from Yannis and from Michelle. So the first is around responsible AI. As part of my role in the UK, I'm helping to lead something called Responsible AI UK. And we've had thousands of conversations with all sorts of groups. And perhaps the biggest learning we've had is to remind people that it's not the AI that's going to be responsible. The word responsible is pointing at us, right? We need to make a solemn pledge to be accountable for our actions in using AI. That's what the responsible bit means. And so, Michelle, the ideas there around transparency, obviously very important indeed. Perhaps another word for it is legibility. So you would have seen, for example, the proposals for people writing data sheets for data sets. Well, we could have a similar thing for the use of AI in our publications, data sheets for the process of using AI. If you're interested in this topic, this is a plug, sorry Neha, Ben Schneiderman, Yvonne Rogers, Elizabeth Churchill, Lucia Tarenci, and myself will have a panel in here tomorrow at the same time, which is asking that question. How should we use AI in the HCI work, but also what is the role of HCI in developing responsible AI? The second thing I want to touch on is Yannis, your kind of call to arms to rethink about how we come together. And I'll tell you a very brief story, because I know Neha's glaring at me, but I can't see you, Neha. I did AI or machine learning in the 1990s. We were building large vocabulary speech recognizers. The surprising thing, back then, large meant 20,000 words. And after I finished my PhD studies, I decided I would go into the church. I would go into the church and become a preacher. And guess what happened? I was called instead not by God, but by Chi and HCI. And I feel I was led in the right direction. And the reason is, resonates with what Yannis was saying. This community, and indeed the field of HCI, isn't simply it isn't at all a place where we just produce outputs and put them on shelves and we build our careers. What drew me in the beginning of the 90s, was the fact that this is a community that had a purpose, it had a vision, it had a sense of doing good in the world. Years ago, I wrote with Bonnie Nardi and Beth Minot, a transactions on computer-human interaction special issue. And we said that HCI is the noble face of computer science. I think now, it was certainly true back then, but now we need to remind ourselves that this community, SIGCHI, through the ACM, has an absolute need to become again that beacon of light, bringing hope and bringing real purpose through the use of technology. So, onto the formats then, as well as the ones that Yannis, very, very interesting provocations there, Yannis. Two other things we'd like feedback on and discussion of. The first is to federate some of our conferences. So we have 30 specialized conferences. They are wonderful communities, places where there is scholarly depth, but they're also places of purpose. When we ran the Milan Futures Summit, something that we saw in the room was the fact that by bringing those different communities or representatives together, we realized that we were much more when we were collaborating and connecting. So we'd like to think about how we might bring collections of our 30 conferences together, co-located in real time for that real discussion. Then, kind of like on the other side of the spectrum, we're also proposing SIGCHI Online. You would have seen that slide in the town hall. And that's there again to address the need for people who don't want to get on planes, but do want to have that sense of coming together and sharing their purpose. Because my vision, and I hope yours too, for SIGCHI, and I think we see it in ACM, is that this place becomes, as it always has been, a place where the people and their discussions and their shared purpose pushes forward not just science and scholarship, but real, tangible change in everyday communities' lives. So we have the Slido up there. It'd be great to have comments and suggestions, but of course, these conversations will continue for the rest of the conference. I'm here, Neha's here, the rest of the EC, the steering committee is here. Talk to us and be a part of that future. Neha.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you all who have been, panelists. I think it's time for us to give a round of applause to all of you for sharing and for doing all of the service work that you have been. So, thank you. Just a couple more points. So we've been talking in terms of principles. We've talked in terms of conference formats, so zooming out and zooming in. And we will be doing some of that also tomorrow at the conference's lunch. If you're part of a steering committee, you're most welcome to join. And if you care about how we do our conferences and also AI use, there are channels where we can kind of create room for more discussion. So please do let me know or let Matt know if you're interested in contributing to these conversations. So with that, thank you all for joining in this discussion, and hopefully you'll find ways to stay engaged as well, and engaged and interested. Thank you.